Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast. I have got another PTSD case study for you. This is someone called Alicia, and I'll read the blurb out in a second. She is, like all of these case studies, kind of based on various people I've supported over the years, but is a hypothetical person to kind of respect sort of client confidentiality. Yeah, I think you'll find it interesting if you're a kind of herbalist student or just, DIY self-educating. I'd love to know, what you think and how you're finding these episodes. Yeah, if it's just a load of like random meaningless words to you, then I really encourage you to join the Herbalism PTSD and Traumatic Stress course, because I go into detail about all these different herbal actions and all the things and what they mean and the different nervous system states and kind of polyvagal theory terms. So yeah, you can this is just a little snippet, if that makes sense. Okay, yeah, and the course is open until this coming Sunday. It's not going to be open for enrollment again until April or like March, April next year. I haven't decided yet. Yeah, I hope this is interesting and that you find some value. Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes to sign up to the course. Just to emphasize again, really is no one turned away for lack of funds. Okay, thanks. Take care. Bye. Okay, so let's get stuck in. Alicia, her was recently arrested. It was her first time and she was surprised by how awful it felt and how much it affected her. She has been having panic attacks and feels absolutely terrified of being arrested again. So she has withdrawn from several groups and now feels lonely and lost. She feels fine, otherwise is in good health, exercises a lot with her dog and grows her own vegetables. She has no allergies and is not on any medications. Okay, so yeah, same kind of framework as before, looking at kind of ruling things out with medication and allergies, sleep, nervous system state, digestion, nutrition, and inflammation. So yeah, fortunately for us, no known allergies, no medications. In terms of sleep, there's nothing shared. Maybe I should have put in a bit of detail, but let's just assume that she's sleeping fine. Okay, so nervous system state. So this is obviously where her body is kind of expressing a lot of distress. So she's having panic attacks. She's in fight or flight, which is contributing to panic attacks, but also some freeze, right? So I talk about kind of polyvagal theory as its whole own lesson in the Herbalism PTSD and Traumatic Stress course. But freeze is generally a state where there is a lot of background activation, but you're kind of frozen, whereas shut down is kind of more that you're in parasympathetic, so it's technically this kind of rest and digest state, but actually you're shut down, so it's not a kind of safe and social, you're it's still a strong trauma response. She mentions feeling terrified, terror as a feeling is quite intense. So yeah, I think there's probably a lot of kind of residual activation from these experiences that needs to be kind of shifted. And in the Herbalism PTSD and Traumatic Stress course, we talk not just about herbs, obviously, but other collective responses to traumatic stress, but also other tools as part of a kind of framework that introduces kind of resting and kind of releasing trauma, as in you have to kind of get it out, process it, whether that's talking to people or having kind of brain spotting or EDMR. And I talk about all the nuances of these tools and how they're kind of capitalized on by bloody states and armies and all this shit. But, what can we take from them to kind of serve our struggles and serve our communities? Yeah. So it's kind of rest, release, renew. How do we kind of recover? And resistance, how do we funnel this kind of these processes into organizing ongoingly? But yeah, I think for Alicia, there is quite a kind of stuckness. She's not someone who's been in fight or flight long term. She's having a response to a kind of direct acute event, and that's quite significant. And I don't want to say it's easier, because I think one-off events, a bombing or not that bombing's sorry, that's a bad example, but I mean for example, when I was a kid, I nearly died in a explosion. My dad was in the Air Force, and he left us when I was 4, but in my earlier years I had this kind of military child movement, so we lived in Sri Lanka, And it was during the kind of civil war, well, it's called a civil war, but this, like violence from the Sri Lankan state against kind of Tamil communities. And there was a big bombing in Colombo, and my playgroup blew up basically. And we were like this whole skylight collapsed, and we were like under like a bit of a cover. So we were okay, but like it really kind of like froze me, if that makes sense, like in terms of like the teachers at the time, like the kind of care assistant types like were saying that like all the other kids were screaming, and I just stood on the spot, and they were really like amazed by like, wow, Nicole was so calm, and she was just kind of like quiet, and then checking on people and stuff. And it's like, actually no, I was having like a really intense freeze response, probably because like whiteness like socializes you to like freeze, right, rather than actually like express your distress, God forbid. Anyway, that's a real side note. But what I'm saying is like sometimes like a one-off traumatic event, like a car accident, like it's kind of what the PTSD field has been designed for. Like it's different to someone who, for example, doesn't have a baseline of safety because of like childhood neglect. Does that make sense? So with Alicia, like she's, I don't want to assume anything about her background. Like she's a completely hypothetical person, but she's got a very clear moment of being arrested. Like arrests are traumatic because they're extremely immobilizing for the body. And then, you're put in a cage, you're at risk of kind of violence from the police in terms of like, being attacked or sexual violence, or, especially if you use drugs, or, you're a racialized person, and, you could literally be murdered by the police. I mean, the police murder all sorts of people. But anyway, oh my God, I'm going on so many side tangents. But what I'm saying is basically like she has like this clear moment that this has started, and things like EDMR could really help her, like in terms of shifting the activation, like working with a somatic therapist, for example, like finding out where that trauma is really stuck could be really powerful. Trauma releasing exercises I talk about in the course, like this kind of shaking, could be really fantastic, like in terms of releasing. Like I think herbs will be great in terms of rebuilding safety for her, but yeah, having this kind of support to process this event, I think would be really important, because she's obviously like completely immobilized by fearing it's going to happen again. And I think that's really common for people that experience state repression. It's not so much what they went through was so awful, even though most of the times it is. It's more that they just can't do it again, like it's effective, right, at stopping people from being kind of politically active. Anyway, so nervous system state, I'm kind of drawing on some of the herbs in the panic attacks guide, which you can get for free on my website. So yeah, we're thinking about herbs that really help in the moment of a panic attack, like motherwort, for example, is like fantastic in those moments. Passion flower can be fantastic in those moments, especially like tincture. Valerian, I'm a little bit wary of valerian in situations of depression, and I think that's where she's shifted to. But what we're trying to do with panic attacks is we're trying to reduce the likelihood of a panic attack by like reducing the overall kind of sympathetic charge that someone's experiencing through the day. So often panic attacks come once, like it's kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? It's like, sorry, that's a really specious metaphor, but like, yeah, it's kind of like the end of the line. So yeah, in terms of how do we reduce that kind of activation throughout the day, maybe we're thinking like chamomile, lavender, lemon balm. Lemon balm's wonderful because it's also uplifting, and she's disclosed about feeling kind of depressed and lonely and lost. So I think lemon balm could be wonderful. Hawthorn, it can be very like strengthening. Panic attacks commonly come with a lot of heart palpitations, and kind of like chest related pressure. So I think, hawthorn and rose, rose is really wonderful, especially if you are feeling a bit kind of lonely and lost. I think it is like a real heart opener. And even though it is this kind of one big traumatic event, like I think the consequences of that have been very tiring and taxing on her nervous system. So I would always want to draw on like nerve tonics. So skullcap, which I just bang on about skullcap all the time, but that could really help kind of reduce this charge for her in the evening. She doesn't say when she's been having panic attacks mostly. Bethany is really fantastic for nightmares, and I know she hasn't said about sleep. But I associate Bethany with like fear. Like if someone's in that kind of like state where like fear is like affecting their choices, you know, like a lot of survivors of like sexual violence or intimate partner violence, like there's a lot of like fear there because of this like daily fucking scanning of like a threat, like am I in danger today? And I think that is quite different to someone who maybe feels like, for example, with prison, like I don't feel like I'm constantly at risk of going back to prison right now. I did when I was on license and like the first couple of years coming out of prison, but now I don't like so much. Whereas I think if you've survived something that's like a little bit more not mundane in the sense of like the experience is mundane, because of course trauma is never fucking mundane, but I mean in the sense of like something where you're going to be seeing like daily triggers reminding you of that situation, I think that's going to carry like a bit more of a like harrowing presence of like fear. So for example, if you've had like a traumatic past with like using heroin or something, and you've got all your memories of where you've picked up from, where you've used from, where you've seen your friend overdose, like, you know, like where you've been in hospital, like, and you've got like kind of constant triggers around you. I think for Alicia, like her whole world has been kind of organizing, and now she's, you know, what gave her probably a big quality of life and passion and purpose is now turned into a threat, right? So I think Bethany is really great for that kind of like fear stuff. Also, like St. John's wort is really fantastic for that, because it is obviously, you know, uplifting and it has this kind of antidepressant action. But it's also really fantastic for sort of frayed nerves. And I think the more sort of frayed our nerves are, the more frightened and sensitive and like hyperactivated we feel. So yeah, St. John's wort could be good. And also when she's saying she's feeling kind of lonely and lost, I think St. John's wort is really fantastic for that kind of like lingering pain and depression. I wouldn't want to give her any kind of stimulating or warming adaptogens, like things like ashwagandha, because of like the heat signs, like the panic attacks. Milky oats, again, absolutely perfect, like nourishing, soothing, calming. Yeah, I think that would be really good. And then, yeah, I'm not sure about stimulating nervines, because I think she does have a lot of heat, and this is when it gets like quite complicated and challenging, because she has a mixture of like kind of depression because she's lost a lot of her purpose and confidence, but actually she's still highly activated because of the panic attacks and the anxiety. So I would be quite nervous of like putting more heat there, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think St. John's wort is kind of, yeah, nice. It's warming, but it's also cooling. I know like herbal energetics, it just probably sounds like absolute nonsense to people. But yeah. Okay, so digestion, she said nothing to report. Hopefully she's got a kind of, you know, good steady you know, childhood of good health and stuff. Nutrition, you know, she's having organic vegetables, but she is talking about the kind of impacts, you know, we are thinking about the impacts of fight or flight. Again, B6 and just the B vitamins in general, B12 especially, magnesium and vitamin D. And then in terms of inflammation, like there is, like I've mentioned it a bit already, this kind of depression tendency like going on for her. So like lemon balm or St. John's wort would be great. And it says she exercises a lot. And, you know, I talk about movement and stuff in the Herbalism PTSD and traumatic stress course. Like exercise is interesting because people really think that it makes you really healthy, but actually a lot of exercise can be incredibly like depleting for people. And, you know, put them in fight or flight a lot. Like, you know, it's a whole thing. I talk about healthism in the course, drawing on kind of knowledge from communities that have been working around disability justice and kind of challenging, you know, our kind of perceptions of health, which, you know, are really sold to us as kind of capitalist mindset. Sorry, I feel like I'm going on a lot of tangents. I don't know why. But yeah, so yeah, for Alicia, I would be giving her, in kind of summary, I would be definitely giving her support in terms of a panic attack blend to kind of help her in the moment, you know, increase their intensity. And I would be supporting her in terms of like toning down that nervous system activation. And then, yeah, I would be trying to address the traumatic experiences. So, you know, whether that's kind of counseling or EDMR or trauma releasing exercises, stuff like that. And, you know, maybe she could be supported to kind of organize in like a less direct actiony way. Like right now, if that's too overwhelming and potentially harmful for her, I know this is like real fucking privileged when you get to choose what kind of organizing you do, but I also think it is worth naming that it is possible for not everyone to be doing the like arrestable shit like all the time. And, you know, like it's also really fucking important to do other stuff. You know, she knows how to grow vegetables. Like maybe she could get involved in some sort of, you know, community food project or something, or, you know, do defendant support, you know, support other people going through it. Or, you know, do like animal rescue stuff. Like she mentions her dog. Like I think, yeah, just kind of giving her the options that there's, you know, meaning and vitality in life and lots of options to resist that don't have to put her, you know, right in the kind of line of the cops. But yeah, I know that that's not always an option for everyone, but I just think for her, if it is an option, then that could just give her nervous system the kind of respite till she is ready again to potentially take more risks or do direct action or whatever. So yeah, I think that's what I've got to say about Alicia. Let me know your thoughts. I am posting these on Instagram, so I'm also enjoying people's comments as well. So yeah, check that out. And just shameless reminder, Herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course, not much longer. Final push now. I've got some like energy back to push it for this last week. And I'm excited to kind of close it down again for the winter, and I'll open it up again next kind of March, April, hopefully. So yeah, please sign up if you're interested. No one turned away for a lack of funds and all that malarkey. Okay, thanks so much. Cheers. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.